Hey everybody, Eric from Metro Game Remix here, and today I want to talk about what makes JRPGs great, and for the first time ever, I've phoned a friend. Stay tuned. Okay, so as I said, I have phoned a friend today. I have SuperDerek, wherever I decide to put you on the screen. How's it going, man?
Hey, it's going really great, man. It's been a great evening so far.
Yes.
I just spent like a half hour talking to you over on my channel.
Yes.
SuperDerek RPGs, and you guys should check it out if you're interested. But thanks for having me onto your channel now, man.
Of course. And look, I wanted to do a video on JRPGs, and I thought, who better to get in touch with and actually do a collaboration and a discussion video with than you? So again, SuperDerek is a great channel, does lots of reviews and retrospectives and the weekly updates and discussion videos that you do. I'm really loving them. They're really great, and you're pumping them out quite quickly as well. So it's great. So it's a great place to follow.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll just do the thing where I say, hey everybody, I'm SuperDerek. I make thoughtful and thought-provoking videos for gamers who love RPGs. And we're doing one over on this channel today.
Yes, I love it. I love it. So if you're watching part 2, which is this is essentially part 2 from the part 1, make sure to go subscribe to Derek and all that stuff. So you know all that stuff. So look, today I want to talk about what makes JRPGs great. I love JRPGs. JRPGs are my favorite genre, and I've only really recently realized this because growing up I played Pokemon and all that stuff. But technically, Pokemon is a JRPG, isn't it? So what makes JRPGs great, man? Like, just in a nutshell, what would you say?
Man, I'm so glad that you asked me on to talk about this, because I've been wondering the same thing myself, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
No, don't put me on the spot like that.
The old switcheroo.
Oh, how the turntables.
No, but oh man, RPGs are fantastic for a number of reasons, man. Not the least of which is the fact that when I was playing RPGs when I was playing regular games like Mario back in the day, I always had this little sort of like disconnect between the beginning of the game and the end of the game. So you're starting off as Mario, and Mario is, just a dude who jumps and runs from one side of the screen to the other, and eventually he defeats Bowser. But he doesn't really get any stronger between the beginning and the end. It's like, man, you'd think that he might get stronger or something, right? In his journey, in this epic quest to save a princess, you would think that something along the line would have like changed between point A and point B, but it never did for me. Like I understand now, not as not a child, that it's the player who gets stronger or more skillful over time, but Mario himself, he's the same dude at the end of his quest as he was at the beginning of his quest. Nothing has really changed. He is immortally whatever he is at your skill level, right? So I don't know, that's never really stuck super well with me. So one of the things that really drew me into the RPG genre was, believe it or not what most people would call an RPG. It was Legend of Zelda, and that was a game that does have character progression, at least in a statistical sense. Like, you get stronger swords, you get more heart containers, you can put on different armors and stuff, and that's really cool. But by the time that you do defeat the boss at the end of the game, Link is a different person than he was at the beginning. Like, there's no way, unless you're very skilled, that Link with 3 hearts and his plain old wooden sword could take out Ganon at the end of the game, right?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, sure, of course, there are speedrunners who will put me to shame, and I'm sure that's...
Well, you're not playing it in a typical sense, but I think, like, the JRPG, what makes the JRPG great, one of the many aspects is that it gives you a why and answers the why towards the end of the game. So, for example, Mario, go save Princess Peach. I get that, but like, why? Like, what other implications are there of doing it and Bowser having stolen Peach? If you want to get on a really, really basic sense. So, I think
the why is but thou must.
Yes. Well, that's a very, very basic way of putting it. So, like, JRPGs are very colorful games. They're made up of many colorful characters. So what would you say makes a JRPG character great?
A character themselves. Again, I think I'm just gonna have to come back to having some meaningful change between the beginning and the end of the game, some character progression. The worst, I guess there are good ways, though, of doing that and really bad ways of doing that. Some of the worst ways of doing that are to, like, if you want to show your character growth over time, what you do is you turn him out, you make him into a jerk at the very beginning of the game.
Yes.
And then you make him like a normal person by the end of the game. Voila, there you go. That's your character progression. And that's, I feel like, the worst way to go, because nobody wants to play as the character they can't sympathize with. I feel like, though, that's something that makes a really great RPG character. And as a result of that, very seldom is that great RPG character ever going to be the protagonist, unfortunately, just because of the nature of self-insertion characters that, the silent protagonist, that you're just basically designed to put yourself mentally into their shoes. So I feel like that's why whenever somebody's like, what's your favorite RPG character? They're never like Chrono or Ness or maybe even more so. It's why whenever you say that, people will give you a weird look like, really?
So you really just like yourself then. But it's funny because in JRPGs, there are consistent tropes for characters. There's always the silent protagonist, probably most famously, it would be Squall from Final Fantasy VIII, the guy who's known as answering with literal ellipsis every time he's asked something. I feel like Final Fantasy really got it right, and this is a really critically panned game. Final Fantasy X, the addition of a character that you can name as whatever you want. He's never mentioned, but Titus or Titus, he's the first voice act character.
Yeah.
So I feel like in terms of like an emotional connection, that element was added there. But I think if you want to stem from the characters and certain tropes, I think in JRPGs the emotional connection, and we mentioned this in our music portion, I feel like you're able to get more emotionally engaged with characters based on their backstories and their perspectives on the world and what they're going to do to change it and how they're going to help their friends. Or even you mentioned this in the JRPG bad guy one not too long ago on your channel. Certain bad guys that they're not really trying to be the bad guy. He's just trying to save his daughter, but the bad guys manipulated him in such a way and all that stuff. So I think how would you describe like a great emotional connection with a character in a game?
I feel like, first of all, emotional connections are made with characters through repeated exposure and mutual understanding of like what their motivations are, right? So I feel like that's one of the things that I was really hammered home on that video about sympathetic villains, is that you can't just say, oh, but he was a good guy the entire time. What a twist.
But he's doing bad things, man.
Exactly. It's hard to sympathize with that. It's hard to care at that point when you've gone the entire 90 hours of RPG gameplay thinking, man, I'm going to kill that guy. I'm going to kill that guy. But wait, I'm a good guy. I don't care. Dead. By the time I'm committed. You put me, if I'm dedicated to killing some bad guy for 90 hours, I don't care if you turn out to be Santa Claus at the end of the game. I don't care.
You've done your damage.
If you gotta tell it early on. You gotta say this is what their motivations are early on, and you gotta make it hurt to fight them. You gotta make it suck. You gotta dread coming to clash with this sympathetic villain. That's what drives that real emotional connection, I think, over time.
Would you give a good example of that? Is there an example that you can give of a character that we hate, or we hate to hate? That's how we would say it.
Oh man, there's one really, really great RPG character, and for anybody, gosh. The problem is saying it is sort of a spoiler because you don't know that they might be a villain at the time. So if you're really concerned about spoilers for Trails in the Sky, maybe skip ahead 10 seconds while I tell everybody else that it's Ren. Ren from Trails in the Sky is the best sympathetic villain in the entire game, because you do at some point figure out that she is not who she appears to be. And then you find out later what her motivations are. You find out what sort of emotional damage that has occurred behind the scenes leading up to that event. And then, you have to go to clash because you are on two different opposing forces. And eventually it culminates in a really sweet ending that, I can't really get into right here, but maybe I'll make another video about that over on my channel. For people who aren't opposed to spoilers for Trails in the Sky, but gosh, she is the best.
So I guess stemming from that again, there's a lot of different stories. Do you find that there's a lot of tropes that are used, similar to what we mentioned in the music video? The bad guy takes takes control of the world. Good guys try to rise up. How would you describe a trope that's probably overused, or that could be maybe refined as a result?
I feel like subverting expectations is always like a really good way to utilize tropes. So I don't want to. Gosh, it's hard. How best shall I say this? There's a concept called the monomyth. The story that is told 1,000 different ways through pretty much every story. You might have heard of it called as the hero's journey, where basically you start off with the main protagonist who is, in a sort of a bit of a paradise, right? And everything is fine and good until some big bad evil thing comes along and smashes it all. And then the hero's got to go off to train with some wise old man or something to get super strong and eventually take out the big bad evil guy and restore peace to the land. And that's sort of something that happens in all kinds of myths throughout time. We could be talking about, in this case, Hercules, Luke Skywalker. There's some biblical figures that follow the same sort of structure as that goes. So I feel like that's something that when I was talking about that, Goku, for instance,
for sure.
is this is the monomyth, and it's told over and over. And I feel like a really great way to use those tropes is to maybe subvert those expectations, because we're so used to that very certain cadence, that storytelling. And if you can find a way to tell it the way that people expect it, but then throw a curveball at you, like, I don't know, maybe the guy that you're going off to train with is the bad guy at the end. Who knows? Some sort of thing like that. I feel like those sorts of twists on the formula are a really good way to use the formula, if you will, to really throw people off their balance, and leave an impact.
It's funny you say that, because spoilers for Xenogears here, by the way. If you have not played it, just maybe skip ahead another minute or so. The way that the Xenogears story is told, it is such a philosophical. It starts off as this unassuming journey of like this guy who doesn't remember who he is, and then there's some guy that says, "Doth thou require the power?" And like that ends up being that is Fae. That's Fae. It just in another form, in another life. The way that story is told, the twists and turns. You want to talk about a good versus evil story? Man, I've never played a game like that, and I haven't since. It's one of those games that the philosophical implications of it is just it makes you think. The gears are turning even after you beat the game, after you pause the game. It's such a great story setup, and honestly, like I never played anything like it since. So that's a really great way of a retelling of the monomyth, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and I can't wait for them to hopefully at some point remake it,
please,
in its entirety,
even
all the way.
Finish disc 2,
please, and fix the jumping.
Oh my gosh! Honestly, that's bad.
I know.
Well, okay. So aside from characters, story, is there anything else that you would say that makes a JRPG great? It's very broad. It's a broad question, I know, but is there any last things that you think like should be sprinkled onto that formula?
I feel like one of the most important things about RPGs are the story that they tell, and then besides that, and I would even say this is maybe even number 2, is the gameplay. Having an engaging way to play the game, and that doesn't necessarily even mean like I'm good with turn-based battles as long as it's a solid system. As long as you can do the monomyth, just put your twist on it. You can do turn-based, just put your own little twist on it, your own little slice of novelty, and that'll be enough for me. And as long as you have a story worth telling, then it's all gravy as far as I'm concerned, really.
Yeah. I guess lastly,
and a stellar soundtrack also doesn't hurt.
What about graphics? Because there's some. This is kind of a last second addition, but like graphics, there's some JRPGs that have aged really well. For example, the visual fidelity of Chrono Trigger will never get old, and that's ironic considering the name. But like some games now, like from the PS2, Xbox 360 era, are kind of looking a bit these days. So do you find it would be hard to enjoy something like, when you're, because obviously the JRPG is a big element, is a visual element. What if it's bad?
Yeah. I mean, it might surprise you to hear that the RPG that's the hardest for me to go back and enjoy is maybe Final Fantasy VII, one of the most beloved dears of the JRPG community. And it's because I didn't experience it when it came out. I experienced it after playing Chrono Cross. I experienced it after playing Legend of Dragoon. I experienced it after playing all these other big, epic, really nicely crafted looking games that looked really great, but and then you go all the way back to Final Fantasy VII, and it's a shame that it was the first, because it also was, I mean, when I say the first of Square's not fully polygonal, but just first foray into polygons. Because when you go and look at it afterwards, even like a year later, they were doing much better work. And it's just the blocky figures with the giant ball arms. And it's just, I mean, yes, sometimes graphics can be something that inhibit your ability to enjoy a game. But at this point, I feel like for indie RPGs, the bar has been lowered a lot. So I feel like the graphics that have aged the best are the 16 and 32-bit games that went full 2D, and then the ones that into the 3D or rather polygonal eras, the ones that erred towards stylistic representations over like the hyper realism ones tended to age a little bit better, like Dark Cloud 2, for instance, which had that cell shading visual aesthetic. I realize that saying the stylized approach ages better right on the heels of Final Fantasy VII's, I mean, because you could say that is a style of sorts.
Sure, but it's definitely a product of its time, though. And I think, as you said, for a game like Final Fantasy VII, and I know a thought like this has been repeated time and time again, but I think you had to be there to really understand the gravity of it. Same thing with Final Fantasy VI. This is something that I'm going to make a video of why I don't like Final Fantasy VI. I think it's a good game, but I don't think it's a great game. But I think you had to be there to truly experience it for what it was when it was, rather than what it is, if that makes sense.
And I think that part of the draw at the time for Final Fantasy VII also was the visuals of it.
For sure.
Final Fantasy VII, to a large degree, was a novelty, in the same sense that, to bring it back to music for a minute, the music video to Money for Nothing by Dire Straits
it was like, wow,
a novelty.
How'd they do that?
At the time, it was a huge novelty, and people thought it was an amazing music video. Nowadays, not so much. No. And, that's what happens when you really lean into the novelty aspect, I think, at the time, especially of 3D or polygonal graphics. Now what we call 3D is a little bit different than what we used to call 3D back then.
And now a lot of JRPGs have leaned into like the kind of cell shaded like anime look, like Tales of Arise, like, which is fine, but that, I mean, that's the style of that series. So then again, it's just a product of what it is and what it's trying to be.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I remember seeing Final Fantasy Spirits Within a long time ago. You remember that?
I do, yeah.
And at the time, it was indistinguishable from real life. It's like, oh, that's so impressive. The graphics, you wouldn't think so. I mean, back in the day, we played GoldenEye 64, and we thought that was indistinguishable from real life. Look at these guys with their
real guns, man. Like, watch out.
Oh, yeah, you can see the blood and everything. Like, our standards for like determining what is realistic and what isn't
lower there.
It just changes. I'll tell you this. I feel like the things that embrace the realism of today, even in 20 years, you're going to go back and play it. Even the stuff that you're like, man, that's like photorealistic. Ghost of Tsushima. What's the other big one? The Death Stranding.
Yep.
Those things you're gonna be in 20 years. You're gonna go back and play them again. You'll be like, man, that Uncanny Valley is something else.
It's so funny. It's just your reference for where you are and when you are. So you could have the most mind blowing PlayStation 5 photorealism, but when we get to the PS10, it's gonna be like, oh, that's like so 20 years ago, man.
I know. But the games that embrace the realism, the stylistic approach, like Tales of Arise, probably going to age a little bit better.
For sure.
Just because they're going for something very specific that's not ultra realistic. And I feel like that's also why Chrono Trigger was so great, or why it has aged so well, is that it's not supposed to look like real life. So your brain isn't trying to pick out all of the things that don't match up. This is just what it is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, hey, SuperDerek, thanks so much for having time to come on the show today. It's been great to talk to you about what makes JRPGs great. And honestly, I think we've only scratched the surface, and we can go for many, many, many more hours. But I think we've had a great discussion today.
Absolutely. And maybe I will go in for many, many more hours over on my channel.
Please do.
SuperDerek RPGs, talking about why RPGs are so great. So thank you for having me onto your channel, man, and introducing me to your audience.
Yes,
and
of course.
Thank you, everybody, for having me.
Yes. And hey, make sure to subscribe to SuperDerek if you haven't already. And check out the weekly show that we do with the Wood and Eric show. It's been a Wood and I, we host it, but the producer is the backbone to the show, which is SuperDerek, only recently revealed. So make sure you tune in. It's weekly on Twitch, twitch.tv/beatemups, or you can check out the YouTube channel, which I'll link in the description below. So aside from that, I think we've covered all bases here, man.
I think we have.
Cool. Very good. Well, thanks so much for watching, and take care, and we'll see you on the next video.
See you, everybody.